I thought you liked it when I got really close to your lips. Like, what's the matter? Just kiss your mic. You'll sound better. Hello. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. And welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma.
I'm your host, to never trust you.
Sarah Westbrook.
Never trust Sarah.
You know, a lot of people agree with that.
Probably not.
Joined by my co-host.
Hi,
Mason.
guys.
Yeah, so today our intent is to really identify how we can grow as human beings. So I really want to help our audience learn through my own experiences today that it's okay to make mistakes. We all do it. But I want us to be able to look back and see how we have grown. And I felt like, of course, it's more drama on Facebook. I feel like so many of our episodes are about Facebook drama between family members. But this time it's my family, my extended family that's going a little bit crazy. Yeah, Mason's family gets a break.
Well, and I love you say it's Facebook, it's drama. But I think that a lot of people will probably agree that is a lot of Facebook. There's drama. It's not the personal communication. You can say things on Facebook that you might not say under more personal circumstances. You often will say stupid things in the heat of the moment and then retract them later on, which is what happened in this situation. And mostly for us, it's not about picking on what someone said, more about how can we learn from what's been said so that we can become better and manage the situations better.
Right. Well, and it's not just Facebook, it's social media in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
very impersonal.
One of my seminary students many, many years ago talked about social media being an absolute train wreck. And it can be a very useful tool, and it definitely can be a place of drama and heated conversations, right. And definitely a place where people like to air their dirty laundry. And that's a normal, natural thing. And one of the reasons why we really haven't talked about my family's drama on Facebook before is because my parents aren't on Facebook. They hate it. So they're not on it.
They're also not communicating with you, so that piece is gone.
My brother's not on it very much. And then child number 3, my younger sister, so not the youngest, but the next one, also isn't on Facebook very much. So when it comes to my family, meaning my parents and my siblings, I'm on it, and my youngest sister is on it, and the rest of my family isn't.
Yeah.
My parents also have always been incredibly concerned about how they are viewed by the public. And so social media, they're not going to be airing our family's dirty laundry on Facebook in the same way that like your siblings have been, because I think most of your siblings, if not all of them, are active, Mason, on Facebook. But my family just really isn't super active.
Except my parents,
on Facebook. So that's one of the reasons why, because I guarantee I have some serious family drama. It's just not as public, Mason, as your family drama has been.
Yeah.
However,
and a lot of it's not related to church stuff, so it hasn't come up on this thing. Yeah.
Right. However, that doesn't mean that my family is above social media drama. It's just not my immediate family because they don't have a presence on social media.
Right.
And so recently, I don't even remember what the initial post was. It was one of our recent posts that shared what was going on in our podcasting world here. So it was, for those of you that are on our Facebook pages, so we've got the Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma page. We have the Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. Goodness gracious, it's such a mouthful. Private group. And then I have a business Facebook profile, which is Sarah Westbrook. And then we just added my author page, which, hey, plug in. We have an official release date. As long as there are no unexpected delays, my book is set to release on September 6th. Really excited about that date because I feel like the September 6th, the fear in the world of Mormonism, the September 6th was the excommunication of 6 individuals who I feel were advocating for truth and improvement within Mormonism, and they got excommunicated for it. And so I just absolutely love that my book is going to be released on that day. And for me, that's my way of honoring, way to advocate. I'd like to continue to advocate. And while that book is not specific to the Mormon experience, there's definitely Mormon undertones because I was raised Mormon. And so I'm really excited about that launch date. But so my book will be out for purchase September 6th, unless you hear from me otherwise. If you would like to be on the email list for book announcements so that you get the most up-to-date information about what's going on, not only with my publications, but also with the other Daisy Girl stuff, please head over to our website, daisygirlcommunications.com, and hit the contact us, and it'll give you some options where you can sign up for the newsletter and the announcements. And we've got a blog that's getting ready to come live that gives you little tips. And there's a lot going on over there. But anyway, back to my story. My aunt asked me on Facebook, when are you going to stop tearing down the Mormon church? And what are you doing to bring people to Christ? Now, I know my family very well. It is not uncommon for my family to use kind of this passive aggressive questioning style to shut somebody up. And that's very much what my aunt's post felt like. Now, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say she's genuinely curious. So I answered her question. At least I felt like I answered her question. And she later came back and said no. And some of our, listeners and whatnot got involved in that conversation and talked about the toxicity of it and whatnot. And then for those who were, because that happened on my personal profile. Right. So I darkened out Aunt's name and posted it in our Unpacking Mormonism group and said, hey, how are you doing out there, to our listeners, in the sense of when passive aggressive hits you like this, how can you respond in healthy ways? Right. And I felt like on that platform, we had a really good conversation, but my cousin messaged me and then he has gone on to delete it. So unfortunately you cannot see a lot of this conversation, but I told Mason, I said, Mason, that cousin, I'll call him Jojo for today. Okay. Because that is not anywhere near his name, but I'm gonna call him Jojo for today. But he messaged me and it was really aggressive and it was very accusatory. And unfortunately, a lot of what he said was true. And so one of the things that he said, I wanted to share this. And I'm looking at these pictures, Mason, that you sent me. Oh, there it is. Okay, I found this the second piece that I need for this. But so Jojo is gay. And Jojo came out of the closet to me when we were teenagers. And he's always been one of my favorite cousins. We've always been close. We're close in age. We hung out a lot. My dad was always cruel to him. And so I'm going to read what Jojo said here. He said something along the lines of, I love that you say that, so this is his mom's response, is passive aggressive. And then he says he's been wondering the same thing. But then he goes into this really accusatory thing, which I had no idea that he felt this way. And I had forgotten about a lot of these things. Like, it's not, because for me, I felt like I was justified and doing the quote unquote right thing because I'm not the one who was traumatized by my actions, I didn't remember it. It's like that meme that I've seen again on social media that says, well, of course you don't remember what you did. To you, it was just another Thursday. To me, it changed my entire outlook on life. And there's a great deal of truth to that. Oftentimes, the perpetrator of the trauma is not going to remember it, or if they what they've done, or if they do remember it, they're going to have a very different version than the person who's traumatized. So that's very normal. Yeah, Mason, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things that I can learn from this, and that hopefully others can learn too, is that oftentimes, oftentimes when my family will do this, they'll focus on the fact that in this case, your cousin Jojo was pretty dramatic in the way that he said things. That's kind of who he is. He's a
like
very
it was,
dramatic
quote, unquote,
person.
Over the top
kind of a thing. Yes. It didn't seem like a, hey, please understand how what you did has hurt me. It was more of a, oh my gosh, well, you did this and it's so funny that now you're doing that. And so it's kind of over the top, quote unquote. But one of the things that can be learned the best is to not focus on the drama or the over the top.
Right. Don't focus on the delivery.
Yeah.
Of the
focus
words.
on the message itself.
Yeah.
And filter through it. Some of the things that he said, you might go, I don't know. I don't know if I really buy that. But other things that he says, you're going to go, oh my gosh, yeah, that I can see how that's how he took that. It's not necessarily how I meant it, or maybe it was. But I didn't realize at the time that that's how he took it, and I can learn from that.
Right. Well, and this is, extending grace to people who are responding from a place of hurt, because this cousin, when he's responding, when he's doing this messaging, which is pretty hateful, in my opinion, he's obviously hurting, and he feels like he's protecting his mom. Right. Now, he put on here, so I'm okay sharing because he did this publicly, said, you're probably just going to chalk this up to my borderline personality disorder, which he put down as, you're just going to blame this on my BPD. And what I'm going to say is, yes, he has an official diagnosis of that. His self-disclaimed, I'm not diagnosing him with that. That is the diagnosis that he has carried for many years, which he shared in this post. He kind of, I feel like, used it as a weapon, but I also am recognizing, well, yeah, the delivery that you used, maybe not the most healthy way to approach this.
Right.
And yes, part of that dramatic, heated, loud response, yes, that is part of having borderline, but that does not erase the fact that I did something shitty to this individual many years ago, and that he's still hurting from it, and that he felt that this was the opportunity to bring it to my awareness. And so I want to kind of share this because this was embarrassing for me. Because it was done in public. But I want to make sure that our listeners are able to say, okay, I can see the toxic delivery pattern. What is actually going on for this individual, and how can we respond to it? Because this is my cousin to me, but I guarantee most of our listeners are going to have people who bring concerns, very valid concerns or emotional wounds, to your attention where you are at fault. And the delivery message makes it difficult, right? With poor delivery. And the delivery method makes it difficult for us to respond in a way that is healing and emotionally healthy.
Yeah, well, and we can look at ourselves and recognize that we've probably all done that before too. So if we can be able to focus a little bit more on our delivery, we might be able to better share what it is that we're actually wanting people to hear from us, and not bog it up in some of that poor delivery. And of course, we're going to mess that up. We all do. But we need to be empathetic with ourselves too, recognize where we were. Maybe next time I'm not answering today, I'll read it again tomorrow and answer.
Yeah, I love
whatever
that.
Your reasons, whatever you decide works better for you. Like Brene Brown talks about doing her SFD, like her stormy first draft. She'll write it.
Shitty first draft.
And then
first draft. Say the word.
And then she'll essentially discard it, or she'll go back and write it again later once the emotion has been managed. then she'll write it in a way that she actually wants to write it, not in that stormy emotional.
Well, and what you're talking about is giving a delayed response.
Yes.
And the challenge is when that's happening and you're face to face with somebody, it can be really difficult to be like, that. Whoa, I'm going to need some space to think about this and, give me some time. And that's where we start to get what we call enmeshed, where we're fighting about the same thing over and over, or we're going in circles, So there's that delayed response. But because this was on social media, I took a moment before I responded to JoJo because, oh my heavens, I was feeling pretty.
Well, and you don't want to do the same thing that he did in that you're just, it felt almost, and of course I don't know what his actual intention was. It felt as if he was just trying to hurt you. And so you don't want to do the same thing. You don't want to lash out.
I don't feel like he was trying to hurt me. I feel like it's very much. So in my book, I've named that side of my family, Grandpa Thomas. Is the last name. So it's my grandma and grandpa T's side of the family. This is how they were raised. And I think it's, in my experience, in my purview, it was my grandpa, my pop, and his wife, and the way that they interacted with my grandma was very much shame, shut up, shut down, which was normal for that day and age. And so as I'm watching that generational trauma effect come down, this very loud response where you pretty much cut at somebody's core in order to get them to be silent or to comply with what you're doing is very much an issue that is very present. It's an unhealthy communication pattern that's very present in my side of the family that I'm absolutely guilty of as well. I mean, it's that tendency in me a lot that makes your family not a big fan of me because I have no issues, speaking my mind. So the quote unquote Thomas, which is again a fake name, but the Thomas side of my family have no issues speaking their mind and doing so in a way that is loud and shaming. And I would hope that now I still speak my mind because I think that that's a very healthy thing. But hopefully as I'm growing and maturing and learning and whatnot, I'm doing better at not utilizing the shame. So anyway,
and just a reminder, that's the goal of this podcast, is to help us to do those things better. Yeah.
Right. So let's jump into this. So again, just a reminder, I posted on my Sarah Westbrook professional page, what do you do when you receive passive aggressive messages trying to shut you up? ? And I had erased all of the names in order to protect my aunt's identity because I didn't feel like I'd really try, that personal and professional boundary. I try not to have people, fans on my personal Facebook account unless I know you personally.
Right.
And so anyway, the response was to a post that I had made that basically said that was saying the 18-year-old missionaries, basically they don't know about all of the troubling history of Mormonism.
I found that original post, by the way, if for some reason
I've got
you
it
want
right here.
Okay,
so, but none of that is important.
That's not important to this discussion.
My aunt was saying, I see you tearing down the Mormon church. When are you going to stop? So I'd like to ask you a question. When are you going to stop bashing the religion that you left, and how many people have you led to Christ? And there was some more stuff there. My cousin who responded says, I love that you say it's passive aggressive. I've been wondering the same thing. And I think that means he's wondering the same thing that my aunt or his mother was wondering. And he said, let's get right down to it, Sarah Lee Westbrook. How about the fact that you and Mason rushed me, your gay family member, and now I have to find it. There it is, gay family member, through the temple, all while you were struggling with your own beliefs in the church. So I want to clarify here. Did we rush him, our gay family member, through the temple? At the time, I would say, at that time when this happened, which would have been what, Mason, 2013
or 14?
It was 13 because it was before Abby was born. So 2013. Did I rush him to the temple? I didn't feel like I was rushing him.
Yeah.
I would have felt like it was normal missionary work because he was living with us. And I don't know what the internal pressures were, because honestly, at that time, if he hadn't become active in the church and hadn't gone to the temple, I wouldn't have cared.
Right.
However, from his perspective, he's not wrong.
Despite the unshakable Iowa Corn-Cyhawk rivalry, there is one thing Iowa State and University of Iowa fans can both agree on: getting hyped for unleaded 88. It's cleaner burning and better for your engine, and it's cheaper than other fuel options, making unleaded 88 the clear fuel choice. If Iowa Corn-Cyhawk rivals can agree on it, you know it's worth the hype. So pump it up with unleaded 88, grown by Iowa corn farmers.
Because there was maybe any inkling that I had picked up on, which I probably would have been looking for those opportunities.
Sure.
I absolutely would have done
Mormon,
that.
right?
And, right. I was a good Mormon, and I would have felt like that was my duty. Jojo was raised Mormon and has struggled because he's gay. And at that point in my life, I did not have the emotional maturity to truly understand just how difficult that would be for this individual. Like, I had no idea. I had inklings, though. Like, at this point, I'd already been furious about Prop 8. I'd already fought in favor of gay rights. Like, I was in favor of gay marriage. But that doesn't eliminate me. Just because I was doing and advocating in what I feel was a good, appropriate manner in one area of the gay rights movement doesn't mean I was not still being discriminatory and inappropriate on the other. It's the same thing with racism. I didn't realize that I was struggling with micro-racist type issues until racism was in my home because I adopted a Black baby, and my focus had to shift because now I'm the mother of a Black human being rather than a mental health counselor. It became very personal. So,
yeah. Well, and that oftentimes is how perspectives are. We don't really gain those other perspectives until they become personal to us. And it's only then that oftentimes we realize just how what we were doing was perceived. Like, I remember your cousin coming to us and
that's
saying,
what I remember as well.
And saying, hey, you know, I kind of would like to be involved in the church. And so we just helped him with that process. I didn't feel like we were pushy at all, but that doesn't mean that he didn't feel that way.
Right. And that, you know, there's also a lot of internal pressures. Again, this was years ago, so I don't remember all of the details. I agree with you, Mason. I remember him coming to us and saying, hey, I've always been happiest when I've been active in the church, and I'd like to get reactivated. And so we helped him. But, you know, I don't know if that was, you know, number one, that's the way I perceived it under my Mormon colored glasses.
Right. Absolutely.
And so those internal pressures, it wouldn't surprise me if he felt like the only way to be accepted in our home for who he was if he was active in the church, because the only way he would be accepted in my parents' home would be if he was active in the church. So I don't know if he felt that he had to perform a little bit in order to be welcome in our home. I don't know. But it doesn't change the fact that he's saying, you and Mason rushed me to the temple while I lived with you. And I can look back on that and say, you know what? We probably did. It wasn't our intention, but we did. And I have to own that. That's mine to own. Now, he does say, while you were struggling with your own beliefs in the church. And at that point, the only thing that I was really struggling with, doctrinally speaking, was the culture of the church. I was really starting to struggle with the churches. Like, I had just finished teaching the New Testament in seminary, so my struggles with the contradictions from the Bible to the Book of Mormon and Mormon doctrine stuff, it was baby. We're talking brand spanking new. And the only real doctrinal issue that I was just like sickened about at this point was probably polygamy.
Right.
Again, the things that directly affected and impacted me.
Right.
And so when he says, while you were struggling with your own beliefs, that's
not really accurate.
That's not an accurate timing.
Right.
I was having struggles, but my struggles were more along the lines of the people are holier than thou, and I don't like that. But at this time, I had still shelved. We talk about, put it on the shelf. We'll worry about that after you die. Most of my doctrinal questions would have still been shelved at this time. That did not start to come collapsing down until the end, really, Mason, of your medical school. And then when you became the bishop was really when things started to just
so that
truly
have been 2016, 17-ish.
Right, because it was when...
3 or 4 years after that.
Right, because at the time that JoJo is speaking about, I was in my second round of practicum. So I did my first round of my graduate. So before I graduated with my master's degree, I had to do supervised clinical hours. Right. This was in the second half of those clinical hours. I did the first half in North Carolina. We moved to San Antonio. Doing the second half of my clinical hours, I'm not seeing LDS clients yet. At this time, I'm working with foster children and adjudicated teenage boys. So we went to North Carolina. It's about 4 years after this that I'm now in, Killeen, Texas, private practicing.
Seeing a lot of LDS
clients going, why aren't they getting better?
Right.
And that's really when things started to come. So this is still a few years before I'm really struggling with my own beliefs. So JoJo goes on to say the fact that even though, yes, y'all were kind enough to let me stay with you while I got on my feet, you allegedly allowed people in the ward, though I think it was your own insecurities, tell you that I wanted your husband when all I ever said was how much I wanted to be like him. For example, patient, kind, accepting it, etc. Now, I know that there was a rumor, like somebody had asked me from the ward, was I concerned that JoJo was attracted to you because he was a gay man? And while that was one of the current concerns, and I think I shared that, I was serving at that time in the Young Women's presidency, and I shared that concern with at the time, Young Women's president. And I think that ended up trickling back to JoJo, that had been brought up, and that, I hadn't seen anything to go along those lines, but that it was a concern that I have. That's where this title, Sarah's Homophobia, really kicks in. And while I hadn't thought about it when I said he could come live with us, I know that my dad was like, he's going to start hitting on Mason, blah, 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 and whatnot. And that there were a couple of people who had said it. I wasn't smart enough at the time to be like, who cares? Like, even if he is attracted to my husband, you and I are fine, and you're not attracted back, and that's not a threat. I don't think that JoJo ever felt that way.
I don't think so either. I certainly never got any indication of that. But we all are aware, I think, of the LDS Church and their intense homophobia. We lived in that culture as well. So at that point in time, I certainly was still struggling with, gay and lesbian anything. Right.
You were at the point where I was like, hey, who cares? I want to vote against Prop 8. And you were still in the brain space of, if the prophet says, if the church is doing this, that's what I'm supposed to do.
In a lot of ways, having your cousin live with us was a very good thing for me because, it was just exposure. And like Mark Twain said, nothing brings down prejudice and racism and those kinds of things like travel, like just seeing other people.
Well, and one of the things that's really interesting here is that JoJo puts all of the blame for what occurred onto me, because his next statement is patient, kind, accepting, etc., and was so grateful for him being one of the very few healthy male relationships I had in my life. And then because of your, meaning my, insecurities, you guys packed me up while I was at work and kicked me out. And what, and that there were a couple of people who had said it. I wasn't smart enough at the time to be like, who cares? Like, even if he is attracted to my husband, you and I are fine, and you're not attracted back, and that's not a threat. I don't think that JoJo ever felt that way. And one of the things that's really difficult for me is, yes, we did kick him out, but it had nothing to do with him being gay.
Right. Nothing at all.
We kicked him out because he asked, can you help, can I stay here to get on my feet? And then he went to work and he didn't move out. Like, he had a job. He wasn't paying rent. His dog was pissing all over our carpet. We ended up having to pay an astronomical fee to get the carpets in that place replaced. And there was nothing I could do about it because his dogs, he told me the dogs were housebroken. And what he meant was they peed on potty pads. And what the actuality is they peed next to the potty pad, but there was pee everywhere.
There were other
and
issues that we were struggling with.
And it was gross. And I was tired of it because he wasn't contributing to the household. He wasn't cleaning up. I couldn't talk to him without it becoming this dramatic thing. I felt like we were being taken advantage of, and my kids needed to have their bedroom back. Like, it was supposed to be a couple of months, and I think we kicked him out about 6 months. So like, the original agreement was 2 to 3. He injured his back, so we extended it. But then when he was up and working and doing fine, there was no effort on his part to move out.
At least not that we saw.
Not that we saw. And we did not go to him and say, look, we're struggling because you're not paying rent. Your dogs are peeing on the carpet. We literally found a different place for him to live. And while he was at work, I was like, hey, we found you this place to live. He was like, oh, okay, great. I'll move out. And then he didn't do anything about it. And I was like, I'm done. I went into his room. I packed his stuff up, put it in the downstairs living room, and was like, you're packed. You're out. So did I kick him out? Yes. But it did not have anything to do with his homosexuality. However, my insecurities that he might be hitting on my husband or crushing on my husband, that's real. That came back to, again, my homophobia. So this is, again, where I've got to accept accountability. Yeah, there was some real fear that he was placing a strain on our marriage because there was a lot of like vying for attention. So like, you would come home and it was like he needed your attention just as much as the kids and I did. And you're at the beginning of medical school. Nobody was getting Mason's attention.
Right.
Nobody. Right. So there was definitely some funky dynamics there, but it wasn't attraction. It was just stressful. It was a stressful time of our lives. Yeah. Like, a couple weeks after we kicked him out, we actually ended up adopting Abigail, and that we didn't know that she was coming. It just happened. So then he said, you tried to get me to marry someone in the ward because you felt like it would be a marriage of convenience to help her have babies and me fulfill my responsibility for the church. And this is where I feel incredible shame. I didn't try to get him to marry that person. But there was some talk about once he'd gone through the temple, oh, well, what am I going to do because I'm never going to get sealed? And I suggested it. Did I pressure? Did I say it more than that one time? I only remember suggesting it once. But the fact that the thought even crossed my mind that marrying somebody for convenience was an okay thing to do, because that's what I had been taught by the church, fills me with deep shame. I did this. I suggested it. And it was wrong. Yeah. I've apologized for it multiple times. And unfortunately, my apology isn't enough to heal the wound. And I think that our listeners will hear that later.
Well, and that's something important to remember too. Just because you've apologized and done the things that you feel like you can do doesn't mean that the other person has to accept, is going to heal. Sometimes those wounds are deep and you can't do what is necessary to heal them. You can only do what you can do and then just hope that, with time or whatever, that maybe something will come about. But we certainly can't force healing on somebody else.
Right. Well, and you can't force growth on them either, because at this point for me, if I look at who I was, where I was, I fully believed that in order to get to the highest part of heaven, You had to be sealed in the temple.
Right.
And at the time, the sealing ceremony in the temple was very meaningful for me because I couldn't have my own babies.
Right.
And the way that Mormonism works is if you and I, Mason, are married in the temple, our children are automatically extended that sealing to us. And so if they die prematurely, they're protected. They are sealed, so they're good to go. But if you and I hadn't been married in the temple, then our biological children would not be sealed to us. Well, as an adoptive parent, those babies are not sealed to you because they didn't come physically out of my body. That suddenly means that they're not sealed to us. And so the only way to ensure that is to take that infant to the temple to have them, quote unquote, sealed to you, which you cannot do until the adoption is finalized. And so for me, because of Mormonism, there was this fear that if my child died of something like SIDS and the adoption didn't get to be finalized, that child would never be with me again.
Right.
Like I was terrified because of Mormonism. And it was almost that, well, God will work it out in the end, but there were no guarantees.
Right.
So once I went to the temple, then in God's eyes, it was guaranteed. And so I think all new parents, and especially mamas, have that like death fear that their baby's just going to like all of a sudden die and there's nothing you can do, like SIDS.
For sure.
I mean, I remember waking up in the middle of the night with all of our babies, like for absolutely no reason, just waking up, absolutely convinced that my baby was dead, racing into their bedroom to make sure they were still breathing, like feeling the biggest sense of relief, going back to bed, falling asleep, and doing it again in the next like 2 hours. Like,
wow.
I don't know what it is about new mamas and like our own brain sabotaging our ability to sleep when the baby is asleep. It was awful. And so the sealing ceremony to me felt vitally important. And so I didn't, when I would have suggested this marriage of convenience in my worldview, it would have been, you'll suffer now, but things will be so much better then. And now I know so much better. Like marriages of convenience, divorce, the divorce rate is astronomically high. The people in those marriages are usually miserable. It causes problems. It's a horrible thing. But at the time, I didn't know that. Yeah. I would never suggest this now. And the last thing I want to say, Mason, before you make their comment is marriages of convenience are not exclusive to Mormonism.
Right.
This is something, I mean...
It happens in the military all the time, too.
Happens in the military. It happens in different countries. It happens so that people can get citizenship and immigration. I mean, it happens, and it's rare. It rarely turns out good.
A lot of polygamy was really based around marriage of convenience.
Ugh.
And so, the idea that you suggested the alternative too is also instructive, because it would be different if this cousin had come to you and said, look, I don't know what to do. I'm thinking about a marriage of convenience. What do you think about that? That's a completely different scenario. If they come with that idea, then you can just talk about it. But at the same time, we're coming from our perspective at that time. In our minds,
what was righteous, correct, the right thing to do.
In our minds, there was nothing better than being sealed in the temple. There was nothing greater than that.
Absolutely.
And we wanted that same sort of happiness for someone we cared about, not recognizing that that doesn't work for everybody, and that it's okay that doesn't work for everybody. We understand that better now. We didn't understand it then.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the reasons that I suggested it was because the female that I had suggested had said something to me along the lines of, I absolutely despise sex, and the only men I get along with are gay men. It would just be awesome if I could marry a gay guy. We could get sealed. We'd both have our blessings, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I was like, hey,
right,
you're good friends with JoJo. And I suggested it, and it was ignorance. And I am ashamed because it's not something that I had remembered that I had done. This is where that whole your memory of trauma, like for me, this was another Thursday. For him, it was.
For you, it was a decent idea. For him, it was hurtful. And that makes a big difference. And we didn't see that.
And I didn't see until now. And so then he tells me, his next sentence is, I find it almost laughable that you now center your care for people in the gay community and the church or both. And I want to clarify, I don't specialize in LGBT issues. I would say that on average, anywhere from a quarter to a third of my population identify as members of the LGBTQ plus population. I work with them. I have a child that identifies in that population. So once again, it's very personal.
Right.
So my focus is different because now I have more professional experience and whatnot. And because I've had friends and family in the LGBT population that have said, hey, Sarah, that's actually pretty hurtful, shared their experiences with me so that I could have a shift of perspective.
Travel. Being around people
yeah,
is what kills prejudice.
It really does. Yeah. So when he says I center my care for that community, I would love to if I was there. I have one of my closest friends, that's all she sees are teens who identify as LGBT plus. I don't. I live in a small enough community where I'm at. I am more your general practitioner. I specialize with trauma, PTSD, and anxiety related disorders. That's where and couples therapy, that's where my extra training lies. That's what I do most of the time. And so I see a lot of people from the LGBT population because there's a lot of trauma that goes on there. And some of my favorite clients have been my gay couples or my lesbian couples, because being able to give them the tools to communicate, it's such a different dynamic. It's a lot of fun, but it is not my area of focus or my area of expertise.
Well, and we've talked about it a lot, but that's because it's a hot topic in Mormonism right now. You know, there's just so much going on vocally on that topic that it's come up several times. So
yeah. His next statement to me was, you did so much damage to me, and every time I try and talk to you about stuff, you ghost me. And that was odd because we've actually talked I can think of, I've got like at least 5 conversations where he and I have talked for hours. Like he and I had discussed my insecurity and where that came from about him being possibly attracted to you at one point. We'd never talked about the marriage of convenience suggestion before. That is like, this was the first time since that happened. Cause again, it was a comment I made in passing and he was like, no, that's not, and it was dropped. At least that's my memory. Maybe he has, if he has a different memory of me saying things or suggesting it more or even pushing it, I would have to give him the benefit of the doubt because again, for me, I don't remember, but if I did that, I'm sure he would remember more accurately. And then he says, especially when I try to get a direct answer as to why you left the church so that I can then bring all of this up to you. Well, dear sweet cousin, here it is. And then he says, you have blotted out my mom's name on this post, but everyone saw it on the original. He tags his mother and says, here you go, Mom. And I was like, whoa, because this is my personal page.
Well, no, this is what you had put on the Unpacking Mormonism page.
Right. No. Meaning the Unpacking Mormonism people didn't see his mom's name.
Right.
Because that was on. And so I explained that to him. And I'm looking, Mason, did you have my responses to him?
I think so.
On here? Okay, here it is. It says, I said, Jojo, unfortunately, so much of what you are saying is absolutely true. At the time you lived with us in San Antonio, I was 100% all in, what is commonly known as TBM, which TBM, for those who are not Mormon, is True Believing Mormon or True Blue Mormon. At that time, my doubts surrounded polygamy, and I was doubting my doubts and trusting we would all understand after we died. And that doubting your doubts came from that talk from Uchtdorf.
Right.
I acted in a way that was horrific and understandably traumatizing to you, something I feel deep shame about. Then I've got this thread. Here it is. This thread and group are completely separate from my personal feed. I blacked out the name to protect her identity, meaning your mother's name. Most people here are not on my personal Facebook page for this very reason. I've spoken on the phone with you for over an hour explaining why I left the church. I apologize then. From what you are saying, my apology was not sufficient. I am happy to talk to you again to clarify my own mistakes. I love you, cuz. And then he says, let me see if I've got the second half here. Actually, Sarah, there was never a full discussion as why you left the church because something always came up. You had to take kids somewhere or had a client in crisis. And then, like I said, you would ghost me. He says, I don't go around ripping the church all the time. He's talking about his own church trauma. And it looks like we're missing a line there. So I want to say there's a line missing here. I don't want to mix up the context in these pictures. But then he says, look at my church trauma. I don't go around ripping the church all the time. So it's a simple question that we feel you dodge. We are not your followers who have much interest in listening to your rhetoric, just like I don't listen to Mormon rhetoric either. He also says, and you never apologize because my feelings were never brought to you in this raw way. You and Mason hurt me and tore your family away from me after we became so close. Then he again tells me that he feels like it's laughable that I now advocate for the gay community because you feel guilty for how you mistreated me. So you are trying to make yourself feel better, but it's whatever. Just add it on top of my borderline personality disorder. Thanks. Love ya. And that's hard. He says, I never apologized. I absolutely have apologized for what I knew about. I think the other thing that's really hard here is he says I haven't spent any time, that I'm always ghosting him because I'm busy with kids and clients. I have 7 children. I run a full-time private practice, and I do my writing and this podcast. And so have I ghosted him? Definitely not intentionally. But I mean, like I said, I've spent at least 5 phone calls. No, I think 3 phone calls. And one, he came and visited us after we moved here to Missouri. He's a trucker and he drove right past us and we spent an hour or so together, and he and I went on a walk and talked about it again. And so one of the things I think that's really hard is recognizing that I have said an apology. I am really, really sorry. But seeing that my lack of insight and my homophobia at that time still harms him, and there's not a whole lot else I can do at this point to make it better, is incredibly difficult for me. Because I made some mistakes and sure, they weren't intentional. Yes, there was a lot of ignorance there. But it doesn't change the fact that I harmed somebody that I care deeply about. And then just in the response of, he finds it laughable that I would learn and grow and now advocate in a much more appropriate and helpful way for those in the LGBT population. I'm not understanding why that's laughable. It's definitely not to make myself feel better. I am doing better because I recognize I made mistakes, got further training, and have put in a concerted, concentrated, mindful effort to do better. And so that's very difficult for me to hear, that the idea is that I'm doing this so that I feel better about myself. And that really hurts. It stings pretty good.
Yeah, well, and I think that the big difference between that comment and a lot of the other comments that he's made is I feel like that comment is a character attack. It's not a curious situation where he's like, why are you reaching out so much with all this stuff that you did to me? Why are you reaching out so much, or why are you doing so much for that community now? Do you feel shame? Do you feel embarrassed, or do you feel guilty? Those are curious questions. But when you say it's laughable that you're doing that now, it's a character attack. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that when we have these kind of situations on, because it gives us perspective for what's going on. a character attack is meant to bring shame. And I don't know that he did it on purpose. I'm not saying that he did, but a character attack is meant to bring shame.
Right.
And so it's not educational. It's not beneficial. And it can be important for us in those situations where we get hurt by someone that we care about to be able to step back and go, okay, wait a second. That is not a question about what's going on. That is a character attack, and I need to be able to approach it that way. Can I still learn from it? Maybe, but it's not the same thing.
Right. Well, and I'm going to say, something that is really interesting in my field is that when I have a client come to me because of acute grief, they find the most healing in participating in groups or activities with other individuals who have experienced similar causes for deep grief. So when we talk about like the loss of a child,
right, sure.
If I can hook that client who is grieving the loss of a child up with other people who truly understand the pain of losing a child, they get better faster because there's that experiential expertise. It's the same thing when I look at people who've been harmed by addiction. Those who were either the addict or the family member of the addict, where they've, stood up and overcome some of the mistakes that they made and they're doing better. They are the ones that generally are able to kick off the most good. I look at Gabor Maté, who is one of the world's leading specialists in addiction. So Gabor Maté wrote the book, The Realm of Hungry Ghosts. It's on our recommended reading list on my website at daisygirlcommunications.com. And I think it's in The Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Maté. And he's written many other things. He's got a phenomenal TED Talk out there. And he talks about how addiction is not what we thought it was, but he's speaking as a former addict who screwed things up. Like he didn't treat it well as a professional, and he was struggling with it as an individual. He got curious and interested in it, learned more, was brilliant with interpreting research data, and has changed the way that we look at addiction now in mental health. And he is one of the, I might be giving him some credit that needs to also go to somebody else. I didn't look at this before this to make sure, but he is one of the key players in setting up clinics where it basically like the clean needle clinics, where if I want to go get high, I can go to this clinic. I will be given a drug that's not laced with nasty things. I will be given the clean medical supplies. It will be administered safely. But also in those same clinics, there are supports for helping me get off of drugs. Like he has set those things up in Canada with great success, like with watching more people get clean and seeing those statistics that we're still very insecure about here in the States about, legalizing drugs and managing it differently. Gabor Maté is doing that work in Canada with amazing results at helping people get clean. My point being that when you recognize that you've done something wrong and you put your effort into repairing and fixing that, you often become the greatest advocate for change. And so I want to encourage people here to say, hey, you can look at your life and say, yeah, you know what? I wasn't trying to be homophobic. At that time, if you had asked me if I was uncomfortable or a homophobe, I'd have told you no. But the people closest to me who were gay or lesbian or on the LGBT, identified as LGBT, they may have had a very different answer. And I'm sure my cousin's going to have a different answer because he lived with me and experienced me differently than the gay teenagers. And I say gay because I was working with mostly adjudicated boys. So my teenage boys that I was working with as a professional probably would not have felt like I was. And so I have to be, if I want to become somebody who is a safe place where people feel like they can come to me and talk to me and heal with me, I have to acknowledge the deficits in myself where I'm not living to where I want to be. Because I know Sarah Westbrook wants to be somebody who loves without condition. I thought I was doing it then. JoJo pointed out where I failed. I can look back and say, you know what? You're right. That one I forgot, but on these 3 or 4 areas, I've grown quite a bit. And if I was put in that exact same position today with the knowledge I have today, would I do the same thing again? The answer is no.
Right.
I would never suggest a marriage of convenience in order to get temple blessings in Mormonism. But if somebody was considering a marriage of convenience, I would sit there and explore with them the pros, the cons, the warnings. I would share that knowledge. I would do it differently.
Yeah.
The other thing I would do differently is I wouldn't have just packed his stuff up and moved him out. I would have gone to him and said, hey, I'm really struggling here because of these things, because the real reason I moved him out the way that I did was I didn't have the skill set to say, you said you'd be here this length of time. You said you would pay rent. You said you would contribute to groceries. You said the dogs were going to be potty trained. None of that's happening. I've hit my wit's end. If it doesn't change, we will kick you out. I never gave him an opportunity to answer to any of that. I just got fed up, snapped, and kicked him out, which was not fair. I did find him a new place to go. He was not homeless. But it doesn't change the fact that it was wrong.
Well, and even then, you can look at a situation and realize that you did a lot of things wrong, but you also did some things right. And it's all about growth and learning. And unfortunately, people get hurt. One of my biggest fears that we've talked about before is that I'm going to screw up my kids enough with my weaknesses, with the things that I do wrong, that they're going to suffer from my weaknesses, like most kids do. None of us are perfect as parents, but that's my fear, is that I'm going to do something today that in 10 years I'll know better, but it's too late.
Right.
It's too late to correct it with that child.
And I know that we did things right because he says, you tore me away from the family I had grown so close to, which tells me he felt safe and comfortable in our home.
Yeah.
And then I went and fucked it up in the way that I handled having him shift out of the home.
Yeah.
I thought that I had made enough repair and apology and that he and I were on good terms. And after this happened, it's obvious that I have more to apologize for, but I also have to recognize that my words of apology can only go so far. And so, yeah, I really wanted to jump on here and share this experience with the listener so that way you could see that you don't have to be perfect. Number one, I am not perfect. I am probably going to say shit on this podcast or on my social media that I'm going to have to have thanks, Mace, that I'm going to have accountability for and apologize for. But also, I want you to know that when criticism is packaged in a toxic delivery system, it's okay to slow down, evaluate it, recognize and own your responsibility, because I have responsibility in this. That was not delivered very well, but he pointed out some things that were very harmful that I did.
Yeah.
But I can also recognize the parts that are not mine to own and still stay true to myself. Both things can be true at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to just leave all this on you either. I was in, if anybody in our home was homophobic, it was me. It certainly wasn't you. And I was. I don't think I would have said that I was back then, but looking back on it, I certainly can see that. I can feel that. I still struggle a little bit with that, although I'm mostly in the place now where I can just love people the way they are. You know, I have a colleague I work with every day, very much gay. He's married to a man, and I love him. He's a terrific person. And again, exposure, being around people that are different is the only way really to overcome whatever your inbred prejudices are. And so it hurts me that things that I did back then would have hurt him as well, because that was certainly not what I was trying to do.
You must hide it really good because he felt very close to you, but you were always more uncomfortable with his homosexuality than I ever was.
Right. And I've never been blatant about it. I've never been harmful about it, like looking around and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're, just very overt homophobia. Right. I've never been like that because I'm not about hurting people either. Right. You can live the lifestyle that you want, and I can think that you should do it differently, but I'm not going to just tell you that and talk bad about you. And that's not who I am. Not that I haven't ever done that, but it's not who I am.
And I want to clarify, Mason's shifting out of that very much and now would be overjoyed, I think, to say, hey, you're married to this person. You're happy. That makes me so happy. I'm glad you're happy. And you wouldn't necessarily have that negative thought of, no, this is evil or wrong or sinful. You would still have to fight it, but it wouldn't be the thought that you wanted to carry. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Yeah. Is that accurate?
Well, and just a caveat to that as well, that's with people that I love, but they're not my responsibility. Like, I don't think I'm in the place where I could just be happy for my child if they were to get married into a gay relationship, but I want to be there. I'm working towards that because I want to be there. It's really hard to unload a lot of the prejudices that I've grown up with because
you're talking about 45 years of homosexuality is wrong. It's a sin. Getting married is a threat to the Lord.
It's a threat to America for crying out loud.
Yeah. Yes, that is what your family believes. That's what you grew up with. So you're still having to undo a lot of that.
I am. And frankly, when you get taught prejudices, but they're not taught as prejudices, it's even harder to unpack those and download them, because we weren't taught that gays are terrible. We were taught that they're wrong. And that's a completely different plane and very difficult for me to unpack and unload, which I'm trying to do.
I think your family is still in the mindset, at least your parents are still in the mindset of you choose to be.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ignorance still that goes along with that. And and there will be for quite a while now still, but it's getting better. And all we can do is each day try and make it a little bit better for ourselves and for the people around us. Yeah. But I don't want, this is your family, your vulnerabilities, but I was there too. And so I don't want to make it seem as if I'm not aware of the fact that I didn't handle that the best that I could. If your cousin didn't see that from me, okay, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
That just kind of goes back to the family dynamic in my home is that Sarah's the scapegoat. Yeah. And you can see that more so in my family of origin. Anything bad that happened in my family is somehow Sarah's fault. Right. I mean, my dad was blaming me for he and my mom almost getting divorced before I could even talk. And so there's a lot of that. And so some of that comes out subtly because, I know that my parents would have talked to my aunts and uncles and basically said, well, because of Sarah, our family is struggling. Because of Sarah, this is going on. And that was actually something that, the counselor that I saw with my parents was like, they literally blame you for everything. Like your brother is doing this, so that's because of Sarah. Your sister's doing this. So, and I'm like, I haven't even lived there. Like, I left the home when my brother was 16, sister was 14, another sister was 11.
Right.
And my sister's struggles in her adult life have to do with something that Sarah did when she was 6. And that's not an exaggeration. That is the dynamic in my family of origin against me. And then your family has never liked me because I'm so outspoken. And now that I've left the church, I'm corrupting you and my children. And so there is just kind of this tendency in my family, and in some ways your family, not as much in your family as in my family, where Sarah gets blamed. And JoJo definitely did that. It was, you did this, you corrupted, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Rather than you and Mason. I feel like we share some of that, but that seems to kind of be the normal thing. In my family's eyes, Mason was my savior in coming to marry me. You are what made it so that I would not, go to hell because I was having sex at 16. I don't even know. But my family very much views you as having saved me from myself. Therefore, you're the hero and I'm still the scapegoat in that family dynamic, according to my family and much of that extended family. It's kind of bled in to that. Because I get a lot of my aunts and uncles coming to me, and I think it's because my grandma is on social media and sees what I post, and then she goes to her kids and vents to them about how horrible Sarah is, and so then I've got several of them coming to me knock it off, we're tired of hearing grandma talk about it. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. Tell her to stop talking about it because I'm not going to stop.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so there is some of that blaming Sarah going on, but in this case, much of what he said is absolutely true. Yeah. So I want our listeners to know that identifying how you've grown does not, getting a message like this does not make me less than, and it doesn't invalidate the effort I've put into overcoming that homophobia that I struggled with then. And I would say today, I've never felt like I struggled with homophobia, but as I look back, I'm like, ooh, that was a little homophobic. Ooh, that was a little homophobic. Today, I strive to be the type of person that when my upbringing shows up and I don't recognize it, that those in that population can say, hey, Sarah, that was hurtful, or could you word it this way? And that I can be open to accepting that and continue my path of loving and accepting everybody for who they are, where they are in life, and extending that unconditional love and really showing up in the way that I want to show up in. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. We will see you next time.
Love you guys.
Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.